Hello. Hello. Did you know the WCW NWO Revenge is rated E for everyone? Yet WWF No Mercy is rated T for teen. And I bet you didn't know I was a fiddle player too. Yeah, I don't play the fiddle. Now this week, as I said last week, I'm going to be talking about the difference between the Attitude Era and the current PG era in the WWF. Now. I thought about talking about Edge's retirement this week instead, but I told you last week, the 3 people who've used this video, that I would talk about that, so I'm going to talk about the differences. Edge's retirement, and I can waste 5 minutes talking about it, because I don't care. I don't believe it's real so far. I've seen leaked information on the internet saying it is real, but I know Edge is aware of the internet fans. And if Edge wanted you to believe an angle like this, he would plant something saying that it was real. So I don't believe it is real. If it is real, I will miss Edge. I like Edge. Edge is a very talented wrestler. And I will miss Edge on the roster if it is real. If it's not real, then I'll be happy because Edge's still on the roster. If it is real, though, I think Christian should be moved up into Edge's spot. And John Morrison should be moved from Raw to SmackDown and moved up into Christian's spot right now. Which would give John Morrison the main event push he deserves, and would give Christian the main event push he deserves. Both could easily, well, maybe not easily, but both are very worthy of taking Edge's place. I mean, they can't directly replace Edge, but they can take that spot and they can hold that spot like Edge did. So if it is real, that's how it happened. If it's not, which I believe it's not, I don't know if it's not. I don't believe it, like I said. Maybe it's because I don't want to believe it, that Edge is retiring. But maybe that's it. But anyways, like I said, today we're talking about the differences between the Attitude Era and the current PG era in the WWF. Now, the Attitude Era, for those of you wondering, was the era between 1997, after Survivor Series. Really, the Screwjob at Survivor Series kicked off the Attitude Era in 1997 till 2001, I do believe, and that is when the Invasion began, and that is when the Attitude Era is said to end, is 2001. The current PG era began, I actually had to look this up when it began, because I wanted to make sure that I had a big enough section to look at to debate the differences between them. And it began in 2008, and that's 3 years. Attitude Era was roughly 3 years, 3.5 years. So they're about the same amount of time, actually, so far. Does that mean the PG era is ending? Probably not. Not right now. Now, I know a lot of people worship the Attitude Era. They say it was the greatest era in wrestling. I don't know if it was the greatest era in wrestling. It was a great era. But the Attitude Era had its share of problems, and people tend to not remember it. They just remember the good things. They don't remember characters like Beaver Cleavage, who was kind of a man-boy child thing, who was in love with his mother, which was just horrible. They don't remember the women's group PMS with Shawn Stasiak as Meat. Yeah. They remember the Hardcore 24/7 rule, which I thought was just crap. Just shat all over the Hardcore division, and that was just bullshit. And it really was. There are other things like some of the title wins didn't exactly make sense. But ultimately it was a good era. And they did have shit that was just garbage, such as the Mae Young hand. If you don't know what it is, you're not missing anything. And if you do know what it is, may God have mercy on your soul. So yeah, some of the stuff was just plain stupid. Some of it was good. This era hasn't had the outright stupidity that some of the things of the Attitude Era have. We haven't had any characters like Beaver Cleavage, any angles like the Mae Young hand, stuff like that. But then again, there's not very many risks taken anymore in the PG era. Like in the Attitude Era, they were constantly taking risks to constantly one-up WCW. And it didn't always work. And in this era, they seem not to be taking risks. They seem to be just saying, we're going to get by. But there are 5 main differences I've seen in the Attitude Era, and hopefully I can remember all of them, because I don't have anything written down right now. The one main difference is TV rating, which Attitude was supposed to be TV. Attitude wasn't rated because they didn't have TV ratings back then. This is PG, but anyways, one of the main differences is the people running the show, and that is that in the Attitude Era, the people running the show were wrestling people. People who had been around wrestling, had been trained in wrestling, knew about wrestling, loved wrestling, in charge. And this era doesn't seem to be that. They seem to be more the Hollywood types. That goes with writing and everything else. Another main difference is, I really should have wrote this down, shouldn't I? Another main difference is the wrestlers. The Attitude Era was classically trained wrestlers. Well, not really classically trained, but they were wrestlers trained more in the old school ways. Trained by the guys like Killer Kowalski, who trained Triple H. I can't remember who trained Austin, but he was trained in the 70s, so the guy wrestled probably in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. No, Austin was trained in the 80s. What am I talking about? I don't know. But the guy who wrestled back then, Rock was trained by his father and his grandfather. Road Dogg was trained by his father, and so on and so forth. So there were guys trained by the guys from the 80s, really. Guys from the 80s and 70s. Trained in that style. Next difference was the audience. The audience in the Attitude Era, they aimed for a very specific audience. And that audience was older teenagers and young men. So really the altogether 15 to 30, 15 to 35 crowd. The PG era aims for a different audience They aim for the young women, probably 18 to 35, and children crowd, which is a big difference. The other main thing is competition. The Attitude Era had competition. WWF was going head to head with someone, so they had to be good. They don't have that anymore. TNA could have very easily burgeoned. TNA could have blossomed into competition. They very easily could have at some points. They were going after a different audience, though, than WWF was. WWF going after young women and children, and TNA was going after mainly the young men. They could have very easily blossomed into competition, but I don't know what the ratings say right now. I'm not going to check. I think it's crap right now. Hogan and Bischoff ran that company in the fucking ground. I'm not going to blame Russo, because Russo's been there since the start of TNA, except for in like 2004 and 2005. Other than that, he's been there for almost the entire time. So you can't put the entire blame on Vince Russo, because he's been there, and they were good before Hogan got there. They were getting a lot better. So Hogan just ran into the fucking ground. And the fifth one, I can't fucking remember at this time. But it doesn't really matter. So we're going to start the first one, which was the difference in staff. Once again, there's more competition. Not only in WCW and ECW, which both had television deals during the Attitude Era. ECW during the late Attitude Era, and WCW the whole time. But you also had major independent promotions, like the NWA, like the one that covered the islands, like Puerto Rico and them. They were a major promotion. And there was another one out at West that I can't remember the name of that was a major promotion during that time. They weren't on national television like WCW, ECW, and WWF were. But because of this, they could trade guys pretty much in the back room. And these were guys who had to know what they were doing, had to be trained, ultimately loved wrestling. They didn't get in it for Hollywood or for the pay, but they loved wrestling because before the Attitude Era, wrestling wasn't as big as it was. So they got into wrestling because they loved wrestling, or because they grew up in wrestling and loved the business. So that's why they were in the business, and they knew about wrestling because they could have worked for all three of the companies, or the regionals, or this or that. They weren't just looking at a quick ticket to fame or a quick ticket to pad their resume. They were in the business because they wanted to be in that business. They liked that business. So they knew wrestling. They knew how wrestling was supposed to work. They knew that if you had two wrestlers talking, you had to either have them both have mics. You had to have them somehow both have mics. Something that I've seen recently on WWF programming, where, yeah, it is more dramatic if they go out of the ring and talk, but guess what? We can't fucking hear them. Yeah, it's like if I talk like this, you can't fucking hear me. Or if I talk like this and I'm kicking the thing, making a bunch of noise, you can't really hear me. That's how it is, okay? And they don't understand that. And now you got, and this started with the WWF, and it really ticked me off. It really ticked me off. Is the WWF wants to mainly hire Hollywood types. Hollywood directors, Hollywood cameramen, Hollywood soap opera writers. Not the people who have the love of wrestling, who have been around wrestling for 10 years, who may not have a degree, but they want to hire the Hollywood types. And the Hollywood types don't necessarily know about wrestling. They don't know how the show is supposed to work. And so they're leaning back. Okay, they're like, okay, we know how soap opera is supposed to work, but how do these wrestling shows supposed to work? And they have to lean on the other wrestlers in the company, and the people who've taken over as the other wrestlers in the company for them to lean off of are people like Triple H, and Shawn Michaels, and people like that, who, while trained old school, they don't know about the traditions and honor the traditions and stuff. They're more like Vince McMahon's pet. They want to make wrestling what it is, a Hollywood type ordeal. Or they want to have these traditional, 70s matches, and they forget about all the evolution during the Attitude Era. If you want proof of this idea of mine, you can watch a modern match between two wrestlers, and watch the camera angles. Watch the way the cameras move, watch the camera angles, and you'll see something just doesn't seem quite right in the ring. And then watch an Attitude Era match and watch the camera angles, and you see a big difference. The thing about cameras at wrestling, you have to know what you're doing when you're recording wrestling. Because if you record it a certain way, it looks really fake, but if you record it the right way, it looks really good. And right now they're closer to the looking fake part, but in the Attitude Era they're closer to the looking good part, and that comes with wrestling experience and being around wrestling. You can also tell the storylines, because the storylines were more revolved around the matches in the Attitude Era, while the matches more revolve around the storylines now. The second one was the wrestlers. I really can't go into this too much, because the old school wrestlers, guys from the 80s and back, knew how to tell a story in the ring. That was the old style of wrestling. They knew how to tell a story in the ring, and they knew how to teach people to tell a story in the ring. They taught the Attitude Era people this, and everybody knew how to tell a story in the ring then. The Attitude Era people have then went to teaching their kids, not their kids, but their students, and they forgot about that storytelling idea. I don't know if it went out the window or if they were asked not to do that. That's not the way wrestling is going. I don't know, but they're not teaching them to tell a story in the ring. And this might go back to the first issue of the wrestling people behind the scenes telling them, don't do that, just make a match at high spots, because that's what people find entertaining, instead of telling them to tell a story in the ring. And people in wrestling know you have to tell a story in the ring, people out of wrestling don't, and that might be it too, I don't know. But I know the wrestlers now can't tell a story in the ring. TV ratings, once again, during the Attitude Era, this also creeps into audience. So I'm just going to put them both together and plop them both together and go at them other ones. Attitude Era was before TV ratings. Plain and simple. So they didn't have to worry about the ratings. So parents didn't worry about the ratings. Actually, because of WWF and the Attitude Era, parents wanted ratings. Yeah. But they knew that's who they target, is the young men in that era. And they knew how to get them, because that was always wrestling's target. And so they knew to expand on that. Now the TV ratings are TV PG because of the audience, which is young women and children. And they want to target that audience, and that's one of the big difference. That's what makes one of the big difference. Young women and children want to see something different than men 18 to 25 do. And young women and audience typically don't know a lot about old school wrestling. So they don't necessarily do it old school, because they don't know about it. Where's my pop at? So they put these matches on to target these people who don't know about wrestling. And it pisses off the people who do know about wrestling. Because the high spots target the people who don't know. And the people who do know watch TNA before Hulk Hogan showed up and seen real wrestling. I had another point, but I can't remember what it was. I don't know. I think that was it. But, as I said, those are the main differences between them. I'm not going to show clips of matches, talk about pay-per-views. I would like to talk about the wrestlers, though, for a minute. This era reminds me of the Unreal era in WWF, which was between 1992 and 1997, I do believe. And the Unreal era was like this era because during the high points of wrestling, the main eventers of this era and the main eventers of the Unreal era probably wouldn't have been main eventing. John Cena, if he had been the Attitude Era, I don't see him in the main event. I see him as a high mid-carder. Pretty much Jeff Jarrett. In Jeff Jarrett's spot. Jericho, I can see high mid-carder, lower main eventer, maybe holding a title in the world title in the Attitude Era. Briefly though, which is pretty much what he did. Randy Orton, once again, I'd see as a mid-carder. Edge, I'd see as a mid-carder. He'd be pretty much the same as Chris Jericho. He might hold it, but it would be briefly. And then you got The Undertaker, who he was a lower main eventer in the Attitude Era. He held the world title briefly. Shawn Michaels, I never saw Shawn Michaels as a high main eventer. I've always said this guy belongs in the mid-card or the lower main event, maybe having world title reigns, but having them be short. I've just never seen him as being that main event status. He was never as good as Austin or The Rock in the ring or on the mic. He was never as good as Sting. He was never as good as Hogan. He was never as good as Macho Man. He was about equal to The Undertaker. Triple H, I never saw him. I never thought he should be in the main event. I mean, Shawn should be higher than Triple H. Shawn is a better performer and better on the mic. But Triple H blew his way to the top. But just like in the Unreal era when we had Shawn Michaels and Diesel and Psycho Sid and Bret Hart, I never saw many of those people in the top main event star, except for Bret Hart, and that was only because Bret Hart I'd seen in Chris Jericho's spot. And that was his job, was to make them look good. That is another big difference, but then again, time will tell on that. So, until next time, go away.